The Message in a Bottle. A gentle sleep story with Thomas and Gold. The morning began with a soft breeze that whispered through the trees and carried with it the scent of salt and wildflowers. The little seaside village was still waking up, its rooftops kissed by the pale golden light of dawn. Seagulls glided lazily across the sky, and waves lapped gently at the shore. Inside the cozy cottage perched near the dunes, Thomas sat quietly at his wooden kitchen table. A steaming mug of tea warmed his hands as he looked out through the fog-kissed window. Gold, his loyal golden retriever, lay stretched comfortably beside the door, tail flicking now and then with sleepy contentment. It was one of those mornings that didn't ask for much, just your presence, your breath, your heart beating softly in time with the world. After finishing his tea, Thomas slipped on his wool sweater, the one with the worn elbows and salt-bleached cuffs, and reached for his walking stick. He gave Gold a gentle pat. "Shall we, old friend?" he said in his low, soothing voice. Gold perked up immediately, tail wagging as he trotted beside Thomas out the door. The beach, just a short walk away, stretched long and quiet, its sands untouched except for the faint trails of seabirds and wind-blown shells. The tide was on its way out, revealing smooth stones and bits of seaweed scattered like forgotten treasure. Thomas and Gold walked side by side, saying nothing, needing no words. This was their ritual, these early walks that welcomed the new day, step by gentle step. But then, something curious caught Thomas's eye. Nestled among a cluster of driftwood and tangled kelp was a glass bottle, half buried in the sand. It was old, very old. The glass was thick and greenish, with bubbles inside that showed it had been hand-blown long ago. Inside, curled like a slip. "Do you think he's still there?" he asked aloud. Gold only wagged his tail. That evening, as the sky turned lavender and the stars began to blink into view, Thomas sat by the fire with Gold curled beside him. The photo and the letter lay on the table, side by side, connected by time and memory. "I may be too old for long journeys now," he said softly, "but perhaps I can send a letter of my own." And so he wrote, "Dear Henry, I found something today, something from our past. I think of you often, and I wish we had made peace long ago. But perhaps this is still a kind of peace. If you receive this, know that I still remember the sound of our laughter over the waves, and I still carry our friendship in my heart. Thomas." The next morning, Thomas and Gold walked once more to the beach. The waves were gentle, whispering secrets only they could understand. Thomas placed the old letter, Samuel's message, in a new bottle, along with a copy of the note he had written. He sealed it carefully with wax and string and held it to his chest for a moment. "Maybe someone else will find this someday," he said, "and maybe they'll remember that friendships, like the sea, never truly vanish." He tossed the bottle gently into the waves. Gold barked once, tail wagging, watching it bob and drift. They stood for a long time, watching it float away, out past the rocks, past the buoys, past the edge of memory and into the open blue. And as the sun rose high in the sky, casting golden light across the water, Thomas turned to Gold and smiled. "Let's go home, boy," he said. "It's a fine day for tea and dreams." And so it was. The waves whispered, the sky glowed, and in the quiet heart of the village, an old fisherman and his golden companion found peace in remembering and in letting go. The Night of Falling Stars. A sleep story with Thomas and Gold. The day had been slow and golden, the kind of summer day that feels as if it were dipped in honey and left to dry in the warm sun. The waves rolled in gently, brushing against the shore with a soft, unhurried rhythm. Inside the little seaside cottage, Thomas was folding a wool blanket. He had spent the morning mending a fishing net, then sharing a quiet lunch with Gold, his loyal golden retriever and lifelong companion, by his side as always. As the afternoon melted into evening, a soft lavender light colored the sky. Gold stirred from his nap by the hearth, his ears twitching. Thomas looked out the window. "It's almost time," he said softly. "The stars won't wait forever." You see, Tonight was special. The village children had been talking about it all week. A meteor shower, the kind where the sky dances with light and wishes seem to float down like snowflakes. It was something Thomas never missed. Not when he was a boy, not now as an old fisherman. He packed a small woven basket, some thermos tea, slices of honeyed bread, and soft red apples from the tree behind the cottage. He rolled 2 extra blankets and tucked them under his arm. Gold walked patiently beside him, tail swishing through the tall dune grasses. They made their way to the far end of the beach, where the cliffs gave way to soft, open sands. It was the perfect spot, sheltered from the wind and just far enough from the village lights for the stars to show off their brilliance. When they arrived, several children were already there. Thomas recognized them. Eli, the curious boy he had once taught to fish. Little May, who always brought a book with her, and twins Sophie and Sam, who were always arguing over something, then giggling 5 seconds later. "Evening, Captain Thomas," they called out. Thomas smiled warmly. "Evening, stargazers." Gold was quickly surrounded by the children, who took turns petting his golden fur and whispering secrets into his floppy ears. He wagged his tail in delight. As the last light of day faded, the group spread out their blankets on the cool sand. Thomas sat slightly back, propped against a smooth piece of driftwood, the basket by his side. The ocean was a dark ribbon beside them, calm and breathing in rhythm with the night. Above, the first stars began to peek through. The music of the wind. The morning sun rose gently over the sleepy seaside village. Its soft light poured across the rooftops and filtered through the windows of a small stone cottage where Thomas lived. A kind old fisherman with silver hair, a weathered face, and hands that had known the sea for decades. Gold, his faithful golden retriever, stirred at the foot of the bed as the light brushed across his fur like a painter's touch. The air smelled faintly of salt, and a soft breeze whispered through the cracks in the window. Thomas sat up slowly, stretched, and let out a low sigh that was half a smile. It was the kind of morning that didn't hurry you, the kind that invited you to move gently and listen closely. Today was special. His old friend Elias, a flutist who had traveled across oceans and cities with nothing but a flute and a satchel, was coming to visit. It had been years. By mid-morning, a carriage arrived on the cobbled road just above the village. Thomas and Gold were already waiting by the gate. Elias stepped down with the same tall frame and unruly curls Thomas remembered, though there was a touch more silver around the temples now. Slung over his shoulder was a long, narrow case. His flute, no doubt, and he wore a coat that smelled faintly of cedar and rain. "Still living by the sea, old friend?" Elias called with a laugh. "And still listening to the wind," Thomas replied with a grin. Gold barked once joyfully and ran circles around them both, his tail wagging like a pendulum in celebration. After a warm breakfast of tea, bread, and honey, the 3 of them, Thomas, Elias, and Gold, set out across the countryside. They followed narrow paths that curved between hills covered in wildflowers and tall grasses. The sky was a soft blue dome above them, and the air was laced with the rustle of leaves and the distant sound of waves. As they walked, Elias would pause now and then to take out his flute and play. The notes floated gently through the air, almost indistinguishable from the wind. It was as if the breeze itself had learned to sing. Birds would answer from the trees. Gold, ears perked, would tilt his head and bark softly in rhythm, then bound forward, chasing the echo of the music as if it were something alive. Thomas didn't speak much. He didn't need to. The music said enough. They came upon a wide clearing in the hills. There stood an old tree, massive and gnarled, its roots like arms wrapped around the earth. Thomas laid down a blanket, and they all sat beneath its shade. Elias played again, this time a slower tune, a lullaby perhaps, or a memory captured in sound. Thomas closed his eyes and leaned back against the tree. Gold curled beside him, head resting on his paws, listening. The melody drifted far across the meadow. The grass bent in waves. Time seemed to stop. Everything was still and soft and kind. Later in the afternoon, they wandered down to the beach. The tide was low and the sand was warm beneath their feet. Elias removed his boots and let the sea foam kiss his toes. Gold ran ahead, chasing gulls. The morning air was fresh with the scent of salt and seaweed. The small seaside village was waking slowly, bathed in soft golden light that shimmered on the gentle waves, rocking the boats tied to the pier. Thomas walked steadily along the wooden planks, his weathered hands tucked into the pockets of his worn coat. Beside him Gold, the loyal golden retriever, padded quietly, ears twitching at every sound. The day was peaceful, just the soft creak of ropes and distant calls of seagulls. Suddenly, a tiny, trembling meow broke the calm. Thomas paused, looking toward the sound. Near the edge of the pier, hidden beneath a tangled net and some wooden crates, a small kitten appeared. Its fur was a patchwork of soft grays and whites, damp from the morning dew, and its big eyes were wide with fear and uncertainty. Gold stopped in his tracks, ears flattening slightly. He sniffed the air, unsure about this new little creature who had suddenly entered their quiet world. Thomas knelt down slowly, speaking in a soft, gentle voice. "Hello, little one. Are you lost?" The kitten took a hesitant step forward, brushing its tiny head against Thomas's hand. It was thin, but there was a spark of courage in its eyes. Over the next few minutes, Thomas gently wrapped the kitten in his scarf. Gold circled them, watching carefully but now with growing curiosity rather than fear. Thomas knew he had to find the kitten's owner. He set off through the village, carrying the kitten close, with Gold. The morning was quiet. Not a single breeze stirred the leaves outside Thomas's little seaside cottage. But the sky was heavy with thick clouds, soft and gray, like a woolen blanket folded over the world. Soon the first drops began to fall. At first, just a gentle tap-tap on the window pane. Then a steady rhythm, a soft, soothing melody played by the rain. Thomas sat by the window wrapped in a knitted shawl, his hands resting calmly on his lap. Gold, his golden retriever, lay curled at his feet, ears flicking at the sound of the raindrops. The rain was different today, not harsh or cold, but warm and musical. It seemed to dance on the roof, like a gentle drumbeat calling for quiet moments and slow breaths. Thomas smiled softly. It's the kind of rain that sings, Gold, the kind that brings back old memories. Inside the cozy kitchen, the oven hummed softly. Thomas was stirring a bowl of batter, the smell of vanilla and cinnamon filling the air. Gold sat nearby, eyes watching the small motions of his friend, occasionally wagging his tail. The cottage was filled with the sound of rain and the warm scent of baking. Outside, the morning sunlight filtered through the tall trees, casting golden beams on the forest floor. Leaves rustled softly in the gentle breeze, and birdsong echoed in the distance, like the opening notes of a forgotten lullaby. Thomas, the elderly fisherman, had decided to take a quiet walk into the woods that day. Gold, his loyal golden retriever, trotted alongside him, nose twitching with curiosity, tail swaying like a metronome. They often came here on days when the sea felt too vast, or when Thomas's mind wandered back through the years like waves pulling away from the shore. As they walked deeper into the woods, the air grew cooler and damper. Ferns brushed against Thomas's worn trousers, and soft patches of moss squished gently beneath his boots. Gold dashed ahead now and then, pausing to sniff at tree trunks or chase invisible forest scents. Then, just beyond a cluster of birch trees, something caught Thomas's eye. It was the faint outline of a boat, an old wooden rowboat nearly swallowed by time. Moss covered much of its hull, and vines curled like green lace along its edges. The bow was tilted, sunken slightly into the earth, as though the forest had decided to cradle it like a forgotten treasure. Thomas approached slowly, eyes wide with quiet wonder. He reached out and ran his fingers along the aged wood. It was soft in places, worn smooth in others. The boat must have belonged to someone long ago, perhaps even a friend, a neighbor, or a young fisherman from another time. Gold barked softly and padded around the boat. His tail, in a small coastal village tucked between gentle hills and the endless blue sea, lived a fisherman named Thomas. He was a quiet man, with weathered hands and kind eyes, and his most faithful companion was his golden retriever, Gold. Thomas had lived by the sea his entire life. The ocean was not just his workplace, it was his friend, his guide, and sometimes his mirror. Gold had been with him for 8 years, ever since he was a small pup, and the two were rarely apart. Wherever Thomas went, Gold followed, through the misty mornings and the sleepy evenings, across the wooden dock and onto the old fishing boat that rocked gently on the tide. One morning, Thomas awoke to the sound of seagulls calling in the distance and the soft breath of the wind brushing past his window. Gold lay curled at the foot of the bed, his tail giving a slow, lazy thump as if to say, "It's a good day, isn't it?" But Thomas didn't speak, and neither did Gold. Today, they had made a quiet promise to each other. A promise not to speak, not to fill the air with words, but to listen to everything else, to the wind, to the waves, to the silence between thoughts. It would be a day without words. Thomas brewed his tea slowly, the steam rising in delicate spirals, warming the kitchen windows. And in that moment, nothing was missing. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. The language of the day was silence, a silence full of meaning. The rustling of the leaves above, the creak of the trees as they swayed gently, the far-off sound of a boat's sail flapping. Everything was part of a symphony only the quiet heart could hear. Time moved differently without words. Slower, deeper. The minutes melted into hours, and the afternoon turned golden as the sun began to lower. They rose, brushed off the sand, and began the walk back toward home. On the way, they passed a meadow wide and open, with wildflowers bobbing in the breeze. Gold trotted through them joyfully, stirring up butterflies and the scent of lavender. Thomas walked slowly, his hand trailing across the tops of tall grasses. When they reached the edge of the forest that bordered their village, they paused. There, in the hush of the trees, they sat once more. A squirrel darted across a branch. A woodpecker tapped far above. The sunlight slanted through the leaves and